Hello, everyone. My name is Kerry Ramirez, and I am the Managing Director of Studymove. Thank you so much for joining this, our first key data update of 2022. And it has been a very eventful couple of months here in Australia. And based on that, today we are putting a very interesting session that will look into the data that we think is relevant to understand what is going to be the journey ahead for the international education sector, in particular here in Australia. Now that we have the borders open and we are emerging from this very dark period and such a complicated period, not only for the international education sector, not only for Australia, but for everybody in the world. So before we start, just a reminder that this is a presentation that we're gonna record, and we're also gonna share all the slides with you. So just, don't worry too much about taking notes if you don't wanna do that, and we'll share everything to you, okay? So let me just start with sharing my presentation for everybody, and we'll just start now. So let me just go and look for my presentation. And here we go. All right, good. So today's presentation is all about 2022. And as you know, we at Studymove, we have been committed in the last 2 years just to help the sector to navigate this complicated wave of COVID-19. But it seems that this year, it's also going to be very, very important and useful to look at the data, because the reality is that in the last 2 years, we have been unable to really engage at optimum level with international markets. I think the sector has done their best, and it has done really, really well in basically creating plans and alternatives just to be basically in survival mode during this difficult period. But now that we are actually moving out of that and international borders are open, it's going to be very important just to keep track of the data and learn how the markets are actually reacting, because in 2 years, things have changed quite significantly. I think in any 2 years, things change a lot. But in 2 years of COVID-19, they look like dog years. It seems that we have been into this for 10 years, and a lot of changes have been around us. So I think that now more than ever is very important to really look at what the data is telling us, so we can actually adjust the strategies and we can effectively build up the sector based on what applicants are telling us and the data is telling us, okay? So today it's all about that. It's really trying to provide you with some of the initial data that will help you just to re-engage in the market. And in order to do that, I'm gonna just present 2 lots of data today. The first one is all about the leading indicators for 2022. We have been lucky that in the last quarter of the year, we were able just to see some data that it's on the public domain from the Department of Education, and especially also from the Department of Home Affairs, that are already telling us how markets are reacting since we start this process of opening borders. What we can learn, what has changed, and what we can do so more effectively we actually engage with markets. And then in the second part of the presentation, we're going to talk about how we see that universities in particular are actually coming out of this complicated period, and what's the position that they have from a marketing point of view to re-engage with the market. And in this second part of the presentation, we're going to share with you a lot of the data that we have been collecting during the summer break. We believe that this is the time when we really need to understand what happened, now that we have some certain clarity, where we at and how we can actually rebuild individual as institutions, but also as a sector. And I really hope that this analysis will help really to complement your institutional views, this additional data that we hope that it will bring some additional perspective. But of course, this is an opportunity for everybody just to take this in consideration and see if there are something else that probably we haven't seen, and feel welcome just to contact us if you have any additional questions or you have any feedbacks in regards to this particular analysis. All right, so let's just start with what we think is very important, which is what the data is telling us in regards to this process of opening borders, which effectively, in a way, finished last week when it was the announcement and the actual opening this week of borders to international tourists. So it has been quite a few months when a lot has happened, and I think it's very important just to revisit what happened during that process and what the data is telling us on how actually the markets are reacting to the way in which we open the borders here in Australia. And in order to do that, I want to take you back to October 2021, which seems that it's like ages ago, but it's only a few months ago. And I'm going to take you back to October because October seems that during this dark period, this is probably the month where we actually had the most complicated point in the process of the pandemic. October was the period when we experienced the highest drop on student visas or primary student visa holders, especially in higher education. That's what you can see on the chart. We reached basically the lowest point with 254,000 students with visas, which takes us around 2017. So basically 5 years or 4 years ago. So this shows how bad were things. But also, we actually, in the higher education sector, this is when universities were really trying to understand what to expect for the next year. And the majority of education providers did not expect that we'll have a good semester one. I think we all were counting that borders will open probably in February or March. And here, this is when it was a lot of restructuring, a lot of like uncertainty of what will happen. But thankfully, at the start of October also, because we had a really rollout of the vaccination program here in Australia, by October, this is when the government announced finally the plans to open the borders, which, let's be honest, we couldn't believe that this will ever happen. After that, we had this period that it was kind of complicated and difficult to understand because especially the state of New South Wales announced that they scrapped the quarantine, a hotel and a home quarantine, which sounds like, what are they talking about? This is not possible. Now, as probably you know and you remember, it took just a few hours for the Commonwealth to basically say to New South Wales, you know what, hold your horses? Not quite yet. But this actually created a momentum and other states follow with the plans to scrap quarantine. And I think this really helped just to start creating a momentum and the hopes that this was for real. We were basically opening international borders. But at the same time that states and territories were reducing quarantine requirements, we also were hearing that international students were coming through these pilots that they were in place, which unfortunately they have just a minimum amount of the students who were coming on a weekly basis. So that was a little bit of a confusion there, especially during the time of October and November. And thankfully, all came in place in November when we see the arrival of students through these pilots. But eventually in December and January, we actually saw that finally we saw the arrival of larger number of students. Of course, in the middle of that, we had to deal with things like Omicron, and it was a very complicated period for Australia with large number of infections. And that was a very unfortunate period for Australia. But it seems that now we're in a very different place. It's just, you know, it's just a few weeks ago, and this is the thing with COVID, things move very, very quickly. And it seems that now there is a different vibe on the sector. Since the arrival of international students and the opening of campus, we have seen that there is a different way in which we're actually engaging. There is a reassurance that we are doing the right thing. And especially, I think that for the sector, it has been great to be in touch with the most important thing that we do, and probably the reason why we do this, which is to really take care and provide the best possible experience to our students. And I think when you see these photos, it's so real, the fact that this sector, the passion is all about the students, and to see all these photos and faces and the campus full of life, I think that is really creating a different mood in our sector, which is actually leading to feel that we're actually getting out of this complicated period and we're actually heading definitely to a much better period. Now, this actually was followed by the actual data, because from October, from reaching that lower point in the number of primary student visa holders for higher education, we have seen a steady growth in the number of new visas, actually, or the number of new students with visas that are for higher education in Australia. In fact, we are very certain that by the end of February, which is in a couple of weeks, we're actually going to have a 12% growth in comparison to that lower point that we experienced in October. Now, I should say that this growth in visas is basically driven by two trends. Of course, new students who are, as a result of opening the border, are happy to come back and re-engage with Australia, but also it's students who were already enrolled, and because they were outside of Australia, they didn't have a visa, and now that the borders are open, are actually applying for their visa, and both factors are actually driving the growth in the number of student visa holders. So overall, it's a really positive growth, and I think this is showing some reassurance that despite all these complicated things that we actually experienced in the last few weeks, we're actually in the right direction. Now, I'm going to just change the chart and just to put it in perspective, because of course, we are not even close to the levels that we had at the start of the pandemic. Back in March 2020, we had in higher education 375,000 student visa holders, which means that we're about 90,000 short from those levels that we had back in 2020. And I think in general, the sector acknowledged that this is a process that is going to take time. We expect that we'll reach back those levels maybe in 18 months. And I think we acknowledge that although we're in the right direction, this is not necessarily an opportunity to rush, it's the opportunity to rebuild and actually look back and learn and improve and make a more sustainable international education sector. So that's where we are. And that's basically the story of the last 3 months, probably 4 months. I wish I had the January data available, but that's still, we're waiting for that. But I think that we're all heading in the right direction. Now, the other thing that I want to show you is something that is clearly a leading indicator. In the past, before COVID, I don't think we look at this that often, but this is basically the number of student visas who have been lodged for higher education in Australia. So that means that these students who lodge the visa, we still need to see if they obtain the visa, they get the visa granted, and we still need to see if they actually start the program. But the idea behind this metric is just to have an idea of how we are going, and especially to measure if, as a result of opening borders, is going to be a re-engagement with the market or not. Now, it has been great to see that when we compare the last quarter of the year, which is basically October to December, against 2020, we are already 21% more than 2020. And once again, we are not close to the levels that we have seen in 2019 and 2018, but it's actually not that bad. We're actually 25% less than the levels that we saw in COVID. Once again, a metric that shows that we're actually in the right direction. But what I think is quite interesting is to look into this particular metric in more detail and look at the composition or distribution of these nearly 31,000 students who are applying for visas or apply for the visas in the last quarter of 2021. So what I want to just show you, or what I'm trying to understand, is that if we actually can see a difference in how markets are actually engaging with us, not only overall, but in some of the top markets. And as you can see from these nearly 31,000 applicants who are lodging visas, about a third of them are actually coming from China. That's followed by India, then followed by Nepal, Vietnam, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Singapore. So overall, Not a big surprise in this, pretty much the same distribution that we had in the last 2 years. Maybe I was expecting probably to see Sri Lanka and Bangladesh getting close to the top 10, which is not the case. But in general, I think that it hasn't been a big change on how we're engaging with our top markets. Now, once again, what I think is even more interesting is to look at the trend for each one of these markets. And let me show you the trend of this lot of visas from starting with China. China, which we all know, is the large source market for Australia. And as you can see, it has been a 43% increase in the lot of visas since, well, in comparison to the same period in 2020. What is quite interesting about looking back into the years is that China is actually not too far from the levels that we experienced in 2018, a little bit further from 2019, but actually it shows that the engagement already with this particular market prevail, and it's actually having a very positive and healthy message to how we're actually engaging with this particular market. Now, not every single market has this positive trend. And this is the case of India in particular. We have been learning through the whole pandemic that India is going to be one of those markets where Australia is losing traction. It's one of those markets where there is a more intense competition. And I think the metric already shows this. Back in 2019, 2018, we had about 9,000 applicants lodging visas in the same period. And look at the trend, clearly going south, reaching only 4,000 in comparison to the previous years. So I think this exercise, and I invite you to do this for your own institutions, is very, very useful just to starting to understand where we actually lost traction. It was not an overall worldwide phenomenon. It's really important to drill down and to understand what happened. A little bit similar to what happened in Nepal, not as bad, but we really haven't seen a recover or probably a trend going upwards as what we saw in China. Now, another interesting markets are Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Vietnam showing, once again, a positive rebound in comparison to 2020, and as China getting close to those levels that we had before the pandemic. But look at Indonesia and Malaysia. Those were markets that have been traditional markets for Australia for many, many years. But since 2017, the number of student enrollments were actually little by little declining. And now, for some reason, I don't know this is just basically what the data is telling us, we actually see that they are bouncing back. In the case of Indonesia, even higher to what we had in 2018. And then also in the case of Malaysia, with a very healthy bounce back. Now, what I'm trying to tell you is that it's going to be very important to start looking into this data, and we'll continue providing updates. But as I said, I invite you to your institutions just to do your own analysis, so you actually make decisions on how you're going to re-engage with this market. The case of India, I think, is a very interesting one. India is a very important market for a lot of Australian universities. But maybe some universities are going to say, look, we lost traction, is now highly competitive, probably we'll look into another market to diversify. It could be other ones that says, no, we're actually still going to try to get engagement, but we know that it's going to be a lot harder, and we're going to need extra resources if we really want to re-engage with this particular market. And I also think that this data helps just to have like a more collaborative approach in particular markets that we identify that we are losing traction. This is when probably the sector as a whole can actually work just to re-engage and to start to gain traction once again. Okay? So very interesting data. And as I said, this is not necessarily the end of the student enrollments, but it's telling us where things are going now that we emerge and we have international borders. So overall, this set of data is giving us a good positive trend. It's actually showing us that things are actually improving. And let's just remember that back in October, we didn't expect that we'll have a good semester one in this year. So the fact that we actually had this process, that it was complicated, but at least we're actually getting reassurance that we're going in the right direction. But of course, as I show you, markets are reacting differently. Things are not the same as they were 2 years ago. And it's going to be very important just to look into the data, just to know where are we going and how things have changed in the top markets that we have as a sector or for your institution. Okay, that's the lead indicators, and that's coming from information from the public domain. But following this narrative of how things have changed, I think it's going to be very useful to look at how universities have changed in the last 2 years. And as you know, we have been collecting for years a lot of relevant information in terms of pricing, entry requirements, scholarships. So let me just show you some of those things that we have seen so we understand what's the position that Australian universities are going to have to 2022, and also where are the challenges that we see in how we're actually engaging under these new market conditions. Now, starting with this, we are very, very happy to report that there is a lot of information that we have been collecting. This is all part of what we call in Studymove our data shop. Is, in case you haven't seen, a set of data sets and reports that are available for higher education providers and also vocational and education providers. And you can get in touch with us and learn more about it. Dimitri Hockel from Studymove is in the chat at the moment. If you have any questions about any of these reports, feel free just to engage with us, and we'll send you more information on the different reports and the data sets that we have available for you. Now, looking at that set of data and the things that we have collected, it has been quite interesting to see some changes that exist in the university sector. And it's really making us, when we look at the data and how things have changed, it's really making us wonder, how are we going to be able to engage in this year? Because the reality is that, and you know better than us, for the last 2 years, education providers have been trying just to align ducks and trying just to align the strategies and to have this strategic planning again and again. And COVID-19 has been just ruining every single plan that we have been putting together. Thinking about the student pilots, I think that the Victorian government had like 5 or 6 different plans to do student pilots to bring students back. And each time that everything was announced, COVID-19 will change it. And although we are emerging and getting away from that effects of COVID, I think that the new environment is still going to make hard for some institutions just to be completely able to do a strategic planning at this stage. I think this year we're going to have to learn how we're going to be able just to balance and how we're going to be able to put the new pieces on the puzzle in order just to rebuild. And I think strategies this year is going to look a little bit what you see on the screen, is this balancing of different stones, which it doesn't look nice, it doesn't look perfect, but that's the way in which we're going to be able to move forward. It's going to be a little bit of trial and error and to trying to track and to see what's working and what's not working for a little bit more, okay? And basing that narrative of putting the stones, I really want to just take you to what the data is telling us on how universities are actually engaging from a marketing point of view at this stage, and how we're going to actually be moving forward in the next following months. Okay? So let me just take you through what the data is telling us, the Studymove data is telling us based on the 4 P's of marketing. And I'm just going to take you through some of the data that is telling us first how universities are changing their offering of programs, which it has been a change in the last 2 years, how universities are actually establishing their pricing strategies, then what are the challenges that we see from a promotion point of view, and finally place, which in terms of international education is what are the different study modes that we actually going to have in place for 2022. So let me just take you to each one of them, starting with the offering of programs, which is clearly the foundation of what we do. And in order to do that, let's just go back to, once again, to October, September, August, when a lot of universities, they did not expect that we had an opening of borders for semester 1. And a lot of the decisions that we can see in the data were based in this. As a result of expectations on not having a good 2022, we noticed that a lot of universities actually reduced the programs that they were offering to international students. In fact, for 6,600 different programs that we noticed were available back in 2020, actually 2021, that's wrong, sorry. This year, we actually see that it has been a drop of nearly 300 different programs less available for international students. And also what I think is quite interesting is that out of the 40 universities in Australia, 28 actually decreased their offering of programs. So a lot of universities, they basically said, look, there's not going to be demand for these programs. So why we're actually offering this? Now, overall, really it's about 5% of programs who are actually have less in comparison to last year. But I think that although it's only 5%, it's just useful just to understand that as we emerge, we are not going to be able probably to offer as many options to students as we had previously. And that's the natural process of just getting out of this step by step. What I think is important is just for you to know, especially when you have discussions at a faculty level, that it has been some big changes in the offering of programs for particular areas of the study. And what we can see with the data is that it's mainly in areas that require, of course, some practical part of the courses. And this is when we saw that a lot of the education undergraduate programs were withdrawn this year. Also, we noticed the same for health programs. This is at the two levels, postgraduate and undergrad. We actually have seen less of the offering for these particular programs. And in terms of also information technology, but in terms of business programs, what we notice is that many universities reduce the number of majors available for business programs. But as you know, it's very common that universities offer a Master of Commerce with 5 different majors. Well, now there are only 2, or a Bachelor of Business Administration. Instead of having 12 majors, they reduce it to 6. So I think it is going to give us a clear understanding of where we are at. And I think it's going to help to, or it's going to be a reminder that during this year, I think it's going to be important to have these conversations of, okay, for 2023, when the demand will be back to normal, what programs we need to be putting back in place so we can actually are able just to engage effectively with international applicants. But I leave that for you. This is in general what we have seen, and hopefully will help you for your own internal discussions. These are the areas that we have seen, but definitely has been a reduction in the offering of programs that hopefully it will change for 2023, so we can actually fully engage with applicants offering the complete suite of programs that are interesting for them. Okay? Now, the second P that I want to share with you is price. And this one in particular has been quite a big interest across the university sector. I think universities are willing to understand how others are actually increasing or not increasing their price. And as you know, we at Studymove have been collecting this data for 7 years now. And this is what we have seen for this year. After years of very healthy increases in the annual international student fees, in 2021, that was the first year when we saw that universities, as a result of COVID and the closing of borders, that was the first year that we saw that universities put the brakes. And the question was, what's going to happen for this year? Universities are going to be taking a conservative approach, or are they going to try just to be a little bit more ambitious? And they are thinking, okay, maybe this is the time that we can readjust fees. Well, what happened this year is that as 2021, in average, fees across Australia remain with a minimum increase. In fact, the majority of universities, once again, they haven't really increased their fees, and this is the complete data set. 17 universities either decrease or did not increase fees in average. 16 universities only made a small increment of 2 to 4%. And it was only 4 universities who actually have increases of more than 4%. So as you can see, the majority of universities actually took a very conservative approach of saying, even for 2022, let's just be safe and let's just not move anything around. Now, this raised a big question, which is what's going to be the position that universities are going to take for 2023? And I know that probably you'll be wondering, Kerry, what are you talking about? 2023 is in 10 months. Yeah, but universities are starting to have these discussions in the next couple of months. So I think it's important just to share this with you so you can actually start thinking about what's going to be the position that you can foresee for your institution in the next year. Also very interesting is going to be what's going to be the position of universities who have not increased their fees in 2 years. Are they going to extra increase their fees, or they're actually going to take a different approach? So for that reason, I hope that the data that we have would be useful so you can actually be able to make some meaningful decisions and support your decisions with data. But at this stage, this is where we are. As you can see, the majority of universities, they still took a safe approach to engage in 2022. And of course, this will be heavily supported by scholarships. Once again, just like in the last 2 years, we noticed, and we have our report on scholarships, but we noticed that pretty much the same set of scholarships that were available in 2021 will be available this year. So scholarships are still going to be able just to play an important role on the engagement with the students. And once again, the big question is what's going to happen for 2023 or even for the second half of 2022. So we're going to be tracking if some universities are going to take or remove some of the scholarships when market conditions actually improve. But at least at this point, we still see that they're actually playing a very active role. And when I say a very active role is that there are a lot of fee waivers, discounts. And what I think is quite interesting is that once again, we have seen a range on the amounts of scholarships. I think that every university is taking a different position once again. So it's going to be very interesting to see how we progress. But at least this year, that's where we are. Conservative approach from pricing and very active use of scholarships. That's the pricing position that we have for this year, at least for what we can see on the data that we collect. And basically, that's where we see things are at. Now, moving into promotion. And promotion, we have been talking to quite a few colleagues. And as you know, probably for the international office across universities, this is the big or the more active role that the international office takes, how they promote programs to international applicants. And one of the things that we notice is that there's a big question in how universities are going to mix the use of digital channels and more traditional promotion channels. Now, in terms of data, we have been doing a few exercises just to understand how universities are engaging with digital through COVID-19. We actually did a very comprehensive analysis for the New Zealand universities. Also, we did a similar approach with a group of TAFE institutions. And what we have learned is that in general, universities are using these 4 areas: social media marketing, student virtual fairs, search engine marketing, and online student portals. These are the main tools that they have used during the pandemic to engage digital. And what they have done, which I think is quite interesting and makes complete sense, is that the budget that it was allocated to travel, to basically send staff or to promote through direct marketing in country, that budget was actually pretty much was transferred to digital. That's what we saw during the pandemic. But the big question that we have for this year is what's going to happen now that staff can travel? How we're going to be able to mix this or not? And I should say that this is going to be one of the big challenges that we're going to face because we are just learning how digital strategies are working to support international student recruitment strategies. A good example of this is a table that I'm going to share with you, and I really appreciate from the New Zealand universities that allow me just to share with you, because one of the things that we analyze is how they distribute their digital marketing budget across these different areas. And as you can see here, each university is taking a completely different approach. A few universities are putting everything on student portals. Others are putting everything in social media marketing. which makes sense because it was such a new thing. And we were in the middle of an emergency, a financial and a health emergency, that we were just learning how we're going to be able just to do this. But what I think is important is that now that market conditions are improving, we're going to need to do this exercise of really measuring how these digital strategies are working for us and finding the right formula to support your student recruitment strategies. So I will say that this P of promotion is in the area of challenges and in the area of we're going to need to start tracking and using the data more effectively to really start just to finding that right marketing mix that would really support your strategies. But at this stage, this is going to be one of those where there's going to be a lot of learning. There's going to be a lot of things that we really need to put in place so we can actually more effectively balance that act of direct marketing on country with digital, because I think both are going to remain and are going to be part of the 2022 marketing strategies for the sector. Now, finally, in regards to place, which, as I said, this is just if we translate it to international education, place is really the way in which we're actually engaging or offering our programs, basically on campus, online, or transnational. I think it's going to be important just to understand that the experience that our students are going to have on campus might also be different. And I think it's going to be very important that universities in particular track this. I'm sure that there are a lot of protocols in place, but I just want to mention that because now the life on campus, and more importantly, the life in our cities have changed. Like I live in Sydney, and the CBD in Sydney has not been the change since the start of the pandemic. So I think it's going to be very important just so we can actually track, ask our students, survey our students, so we can actually go later to the market and really reflect and share the experience, the actual experience that the students are having, because it's not going to be the same to the one that we had in 2019. In the same way, we know that online degrees are going to still play an important role. Australia has done an extraordinary job, and this is the university sector, in increasing the number of degrees, complete degrees offered. This is the data from 2021, and as you can see, it was a massive increase on the offering on online degrees. This is something that we're analyzing this year as well. And I think that what is going to be quite interesting is just to, first of all, see if this offering of online degrees will prevail, or some universities will withdraw now that the borders are open. And also, it's going to be interesting just to see in which areas, now that the borders are open, we're still going to have traction in the use of online degrees. So we'll actually provide more information as soon as it's available in this area, but I think it's something that we're going to have in mind through 2022. So it seems from where we are, but we're happy to get your feedback, that 2022 will be a year where we have a more positive vibe. But as we are emerging from that dark period of COVID-19, we're going to be able to consolidate new marketing strategies. It's going to be a year when we're going to be able really just to learn how effective are the new initiatives that we put in place, like digital. It's going to be a year with big discussions like how are we going to price ourselves in 2023? What are we going to do in regards to scholarship for 2023? But definitely we're doing this with a more positive vibe, with metrics that are in the right direction. And once again, sharing something that is the core of this industry, which is taking care of each one of the students who are actually coming to our campus, or they're actually still engaging through transnational or online channels outside of Australia. So I hope you like this presentation. I wish I could share a lot more, but we're trying to keep it short. Thank you so much once again for joining this session. Following the spirit of 2022, I'm leaving here a QR code that is not going to check you in or anything like that. This is a QR code that if you get it with your phone and take a photo, you'll get the slides of this presentation now. So feel free to do it now. I'm going to leave it there for a second. But if you don't want to do that, we'll send you the slides very, very, very soon. Once again, thank you so much for joining the session. If you wanna ask any questions or you have feedback or you wanna learn more about the different analysis services and reports that we have at Studymove, feel free to contact us. I really, really hope that it helps you. And once again, it's nice to see that we are getting out of the cave. It has been amazing. I get goosebumps when I see those photos of your students back in your campus and finally seeing this sector to basically shining again and doing their best. So that's a really, really good feeling to start the year, but we still have some challenges, some learning experiences, and we'll be part of that journey with you all through 2022. Okay, stop to say thank you to everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be in touch. Take care, and hopefully see you soon, this time face to face. Take care. See you, everybody.